Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's Infopedia web conference. You've joined us for scripted user enablement. We're finishing a few last-minute preparations for our session and we'll be getting started in just a few minutes. So go ahead and sit back, relax, and we'll be back with you shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome again to today's Infopedia web conference. You've joined us for scripted user enablement. We are broadcasting this web conference via Skype meeting broadcast, and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference has been recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. If you do not consent to being a part of a recorded session, we ask that you please disconnect your browser at this time. Attendees may access the web conference recording by a link that will be delivered within 72 hours post-conference. You may ask a question at any time using the Q&A panel located either to the right of your screen or by scrolling down to just below the video pane. Our presenters are going to be responding to your questions throughout the presentation and again at the end of the presentation during a formal Q&A. Last but not least, if you experience any technical difficulties during today's web conference, first try refreshing your web browser by pressing the F5 key. If that doesn't work for you, you'll want to go ahead and click on the support link at the top right corner of your browser. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's session. Presenting for us from Microsoft today, we have a Principal Program Manager, Nick Smith. Nick, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome to today's session. I'd just like to start off with a little bit about me. I know most of the community. I hope most of the community knows me. But if you don't, as Janice said, my name is Nick Smith. I am a Principal Program Manager with Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft nearly 9 years now, starting out as a consultant and in the product group for the past 5 years. I am a member of our customer experience and deployment team who is very much focused on enhancing our customer and partner experiences. That is through coordination with our customers and partners, taking the lessons learned from every single deployment and every single customer that we work with to improve the product and to improve our guidance on how to use the product. That's how we came up and have developed SOF. A little bit about SOF. For those of you who have been attending this series, you've already seen these slides, although I realize there might be some new people on the call today. As we have developed our cloud offerings, we realize that we have to rethink how we are going to deliver and better support our customers and partners in deploying and operating Skype for Business. So we've developed an operations framework that provides guidance on all the different pieces that needs to be planned, be executed in order to be successful in your deployment. Yes, Microsoft is hosting the service. However, there are still many things that need to be done with partner and customer in order to make sure that you're successful. And so we've developed this kit to give you the guidance on how to do that. We are open to your feedback, both on SOF and for my own purposes on the script. So if you have any feedback on things that we're missing, what works, what doesn't, things that you want to see in the next iterations, please go to our website, give us feedback. We'll be able to triage that, look at it, rank it, and get it into our next releases. This is version 1 of SOF. SOF is something that is going to be something that we innovate on a constant basis. We're going to be improving. So you may be watching this recording afterwards. The script that I am talking about is what shipped with version 1. I do expect that we will be adding additional scripts. We'll be improving scripts as versions move forward, all based upon your feedback and what we hear from people that you would like to see. So just keep in mind that the script that I'm talking about today is what we have shipped with Skype Operations Framework version 1. So scripted user enablement. As my colleague Brian Nice kiddingly said, it's a script. How many slides could you need? I do want to spend time today on giving you the background in terms of how the script was thought about, how it was delivered, what you need to do to be successful. This will help you understand the thoughts that we had when we were developing the script and may remove some of your preconceived ideas of what needs to be done to run the script. So I strongly encourage you after this presentation to also read the attached documentation as a refresher so that you understand what it is that we were doing in the script and why we made the decisions that we did. It will very much help you in being successful when you go and run the script. SOF is a larger framework. I do want to call out that this is one piece of that framework, specifically the enable piece. And so this is the first set of content that we've created for Enable. As I said, we're going to innovate. We're going to be enhancing the enablement stuff, configuration stuff. This is the first script, which is the first thing that you need to do when trying to deploy online, which is enabling your users. So why do we need a user enablement script? For those of you who have already deployed or are already working with our online services, you've seen that it's very easy to go through and enable a user and assign a phone number and get them up and running for PST and conferencing. That works very, very well for small scale or for maybe some one-off or maybe up to 5 user enablement. But what happens when you want to do a large enablement? You want to go and enable a new office building or a new location in which you have thousands of users. That becomes very much a tedious task if you're trying to do it through the admin console. I went through it last night, and depending upon how you're set up, it's probably about 15 to 20 clicks in order to enable a user and get them all configured with phone numbers and every other piece of license assignment. That just isn't sustainable for large-scale deployments. So what we've done is we've looked at that, and we've developed, using the tools available to us, a script that will allow you to provide a CSV file, have it run through, do all the different pieces that you need to configure your user, get them into the state in which they can use our Skype for Business offerings in the matter of an hour or two, rather than spending quite a long time going through and clicking through the admin console. So what does this task do? Quickly enable thousands of users. You can still run it for 1 or 2 or 5 users through the enablement script. I would actually encourage that. The reason why I encourage that is because it will give you a consistent user enablement and configuration process. If you are going through the admin console, you may be interrupted by someone. You may miss a step. You may forget to assign the appropriate licenses. There's also a bit of a time period that you have to wait between assigning a license to a user and when you can configure the user. And you can very easily miss a step in that. And then you have a user with a disjoint or inconsistent experience. Using the script to enable all your users will ensure that everyone's been enabled the same way. Everyone gets the same assignments based upon the input in the CSV file. And it will just make sure that you know that when someone's been enabled, all those tasks have been taken care of. We've also tried to go through and remove the complexity of our licenses. I realize that there are many different starting points for where people are. They could have gone out and bought E5, in which we've included some of these licenses in the pack. or they could be on a previous license E3 and just bought the add-ons. Instead of having to go through and say, okay, I want to enable this user for this, this, and this, what license options do we need to do? We've tried to make that very easy in the script. So you say, I want the user enabled for this. We have some logic in the script that will say, okay, if you have these licenses available, we'll go through and use these licenses, whether it be E5 or the other licenses, to do the enablement. So it kind of removes that, where do I have to go and choose which licenses that I want. The other thing the script will do is that it will do some very high-level configuration of voice features. It will assign phone numbers, it will assign emergency address locations. This isn't a complete configuration of all the different voice features, but it is enough to get people up and running and set up, and then you can rely on the larger set of configuration options that you set up within your tenant for configuring how they interact or how they use those features. The voice features that this script supports for us configuring is Cloud PSTN conferencing. You can enable that. We support Cloud PBX with PSTN calling, so that you can assign both those licenses, assign a phone number. But we also support Cloud PBX with a hybrid deployment, either via hybrid or via Cloud Connector Edition. So all these different areas, you're going to have the ability of enabling them for the features that they need and assigning them the phone numbers that they should be assigned. A couple things that are very, very important to call out, and this is what helps to make sure that the first time you run the script, you're not going to run into any types of errors. On the machine in which you run the script, we do need 3 things installed. The Online Services Sign-In Assistant, the Azure Active Directory module, and the Skype for Business Online PowerShell module. I have links to all of these downloads in the documentation that comes included with the script. The reason why we need these is because we need to be able to connect to our online services so that I can go through and do the license assignment. And then we also need to be able to connect to Skype for Business via PowerShell so that we can go through and we can pick the phone numbers and we can do the phone number assignments, the user configuration, and all the other pieces. So all 3 of these need to be installed. The script does do a check when it goes to start executing, and it will throw a warning and it will exit the script if any of these are not installed. But it is very important that you have them installed so that you can actually accomplish what you want to do in running the script. The second prerequisite is that you have to have the credentials for an admin user account that will both be able to assign licenses and configure the Skype for Business feature set. There are 2 ways in which you can accomplish this. Either you can use a user that has been assigned the Office 365 Global Administrator permissions, or you can have a user that has been delegated Skype for Business Administrator and User Management Administrator permissions. Like I said, the reason why we need both of those management types is for license assignment as well as configuration of Skype for Business. I've also made a number of assumptions in writing the script. There's a lot of error checking in the script, but there are certain things that we just couldn't cover, and so we had to say that we figure that if someone is running this script, they have met these assumptions. Specifically for users, assumption that users have already been created online or there's they've been replicated to Active Directory. If there's no user object, obviously there's no way for us to enable them. This is also a online enablement, so the script will not run for users that are hosted on premise. Our assumption is that all users will be homed online. We've also assumed a number of things that we can't control in the script. So from a licensing perspective, we assume that there are enough licenses available to assign to newly enabled users. You can run this script against users that have already been assigned licenses. It won't double count licenses. But for users who haven't been assigned any licenses, haven't been configured, we need to make sure that there are enough licenses available to assign those users. If there are not enough licenses available, you will receive errors in the script. and it will report out the inability to assign licenses to those users. We also assume that you won't be assigning conflicting licenses. The script will not remove any licenses. We will only assign new licenses. That is the decision I made because I did not want to have a script that could impact someone's experience adversely. So I didn't want to have the ability to remove anyone's license assignment, anyone's services. So if you are looking to take a user that has been assigned a PSTN calling domestic only license and assign them PSTN calling international, that's something that you should do individually, or something that you can go and manually remove the domestic license and then run the script to configure the international calling license. The reason why I call this example out specifically is because in our testing, we saw a few people that thought that these were both add-ons onto the Cloud PBX license. That's not true. The PSTN calling license, you can either be assigned a domestic only or a domestic and international license, which is inclusive. And we can only assign one of those to a user at a time. So if you run into errors in the script and it says, hey, you cannot assign this license, chances are that they may have already been assigned a license that is mutually exclusive to the license that you are looking to assign. We also assume that users that will be running the script in an environment that already has E5 licenses or E3 licenses and the necessary add-ons. Unfortunately, in the time in which we were going to write the script, we didn't have the ability to account for any specific licenses like government or education SKUs. Those are different license names, they're different license types, and so we were trying to make sure that we hit the majority of customers, and so those would be the enterprise volume licenses, either using E5 or E3. I do realize that there are some E4 licenses out there. E4 is going away, and so as we're looking at new user enablement, we decided to focus on E5 and E4. A couple other assumptions that we made for phone number provisioning. I am not going and requesting new phone numbers in the script. So that's one of the things that you can do very easily in the admin console and say, I want 10 phone numbers from this region, from this location. And then also emergency locations. I am assigning emergency locations within the script, but I am not creating any new ones. If I were to do that, the input file would have gotten incredibly huge. So I am assuming that both those things have happened previous to running the script. You've gone through and said, I want 20 or 1,000 new phone numbers in this location, and then I will pick from that pool when assigning phone numbers if you don't want to assign a specific phone number. I'll also be using the description that you assign to that emergency location to assign that to the user for any 911 dialing. But both of those need to be created before running the script. I also made an assumption that any data contained in the input file would be accurate and in the proper format. Those are just some things that would be too hard for me to go and validate. So if you run the script, you get errors out. I would also look at whether or not there's a typo in the input file. So what does the script do? What is the outcome? There are really 5 things that I do in the script. One, we'll go and we'll check that the user has the appropriate licenses. If they've already been assigned the licenses that are needed, fantastic, we move on. If they don't have enough licenses for the features that you want to enable, then we'll go through and we'll use some logic to determine which license should be assigned and assign those licenses to the user. We will also assign a usage location. I realize that many of these users may already have a usage location assigned, but we also want to make sure that that's accurate and up to date for when we're assigning phone numbers. And this is also a new user enablement script, so we may have had users that have been replicated but never assigned a location. So we'll go through and assign a usage location based upon the input from the input file. We'll then go through and configure a user with PSTN conferencing, or Cloud PBX with PSTN calling, or hybrid voice. I do have a check in there based upon the input file that we will go through and make the appropriate configurations for what you need for an online hosted PSTN calling experience or an on-prem hosted experience. We'll then also assign phone numbers. The script gives you the ability of assigning a specific phone number to a user, or to say the user is located in this city, and then at which point we will select a number from the pool that you have already requested and got in your tenant for numbers within the city in which you want to enable that user. Again, I assume that those numbers have already been requested. I'll pick a number from the pool if you don't specify a number that you want to be assigned to the user. At the end of the script, we want to make sure that you know what the success was. And so we will report both to the screen and to a log file afterwards the license enablement result, the configuration result, and any phone number that's been assigned to the user. You can then very quickly go through that report and see if there's any errors, which users you may need to look at for additional investigation if there were any errors, or just to confirm that everything was enabled. It will also report back which phone number was assigned to a user, so that if you said just assign them a number within this country or city code location, you can then go back, read that CSV file, find out what the phone number was, and then communicate that phone number to the user. One of the things that I mentioned is that we have some logic in the script to remove the complexity of licensing assignment. My goal on this was to not have you have to go through and say, I want to assign X license and Y license and Z license. We just want to say, I want to enable this functionality. And then I would look at the licenses available in your tenant and make the decision on the best ones to assign. What I have in this slide is very, very simple logic that basically explains the logic that I use in the script. If there are any E5 licenses available, then I will assign that license. I will enable both Skype for Business and Exchange. And then I will enable Cloud PSTN conferencing and Cloud PBX based upon whether or not you wanted those enabled in the input file. You may say, why am I enabling Exchange? I am enabling Skype for Business and Exchange because we need Exchange in order to deposit things like voicemails if you're going to be PSTN enabled. So I do specifically want to call out that I will enable Exchange if the user has no licenses enabled. If that's something that doesn't work with your customer, then I would say give us feedback on the website that I mentioned before. Let us know. But for the most part, we expect that customers will have Exchange and Skype for Business located in the same tenant in the cloud. And so I made the assumption we will be enabling Exchange when we enable Skype for Business. If there are no E5 licenses available, then I'll fall back to using the E3 license pack, and then I will add on the necessary add-on licenses. So the PSTN calling license, Cloud PBX license, and then if they want PSTN calling, that's always an add-on license. So if you select in the input file you want PSTN calling, then I will enable those add-on licenses as well. There's a few things the script will not do. I want to call these out so that anyone's preconceptions about the different things that they have to do in the process of maintaining an environment. These are the things that are not in scope for the script, and specifically we said we would not do. Like I said, I didn't want to adversely impact anyone's experience. So I will not disable any licenses already assigned. I used the example earlier on that if a user is assigned a PSTN calling domestic license and you want to assign them an international license, I will not do that because I will not go through and disable any licenses. It also means the scripts, you cannot go through and say in the input file that I do not want them enabled for cloud PSTN conferencing, and run the script and expect that they're going to be disabled. If there's a false value, I just will not check that they are enabled, but I will not go through and disable anything. So that's very important to note. The script currently does not include any ability to assign any non-default policy or configuration options. What I mean here is that there are different options that you can configure. For example, cloud PSTN calling. I want to enable anonymous PSTN dial-in conferences. Those are all things that are not included in the script. That's additional customization and policy definition. If you are looking for anything like that, I would encourage you to go to our feedback site, put in some requests, say, hey, I'd like to see another script that allows me to configure policies at a user level, and then we can prioritize that based upon your feedback. We're already looking at a number of scripts to enhance and include in this enable area. That's one that I'm looking at, but I'd love to hear from you how critical you see that script being. We will not port any numbers to Microsoft Online Services. If you want to port those phone numbers to our services and then assign them to users, you can certainly run the scripts after the port is completed in order to assign the numbers, but you have to go through the porting process on the website and with our service desk and the losing carrier to get those numbers ported. That is a time-consuming process. It's not something that we can do, say, put in the port request and have it available in 5 minutes. It's something that takes a lot of coordination with Microsoft and the losing carrier. So those numbers would need to be ported to your tenant prior to doing the number assignment with the script. I will also not be able to validate any phone numbers that you want to assign to users when you have PSTN connectivity on premise, either via hybrid or Cloud Connector Edition. Those numbers are not in our telephone number management system. So if you go through the configuration options to set up a phone number in which we are not using PSTN calling, which is my trigger to know that you're assigning a phone number to a user that is going to be hosted on premise, I am assuming that the phone number that you are assigning is correct. All right, so we've already spent about 25 minutes just talking about what some of my assumptions are. Now we get down to the meat of, how do you actually run this enablement script? I'm just going to go through this in slides. I'm not going to actually run the script, but I'm going to show you all the different configuration options we have and what the reporting is like and how to troubleshoot. Before you go and run the script with your customer or in a lab environment, I definitely suggest downloading it, running it, testing it small scale so that you understand all the different options, what the reports will look like beyond what I'm able to show you in this presentation, before just trying to run it for thousands of users. So the easiest thing is script execution. Download the script, navigate to the directory in PowerShell, call it. It does accept 3 parameters. Every single one of them is optional, but at some point we will need the file name of your input file and the admin username for your Office 365 authentication. If you do not include those when calling the script will prompt you for them. The file name will be for the input file, in which I'll go through all the different CSV options in that input file. The admin username will be used when you first run the script. It will prompt you for credentials. The admin username will just kind of pre-populate the username piece of those credentials. I do not ask for the password in anything other than a credential box. That password is not saved anywhere in the script. That password is not able to be passed into any clear text manner. What happens is it gets saved in a secure credential variable that is then passed to our online services for connecting to configure licenses and to configure Skype for Business options. You will always get a pop-up box that asks for that password in order to authenticate. There's a third option that is also a pause for provisioning. Like I mentioned before, there can be a delay. It could be a couple of minutes. It could be up to an hour between assigning a user a license and then being able to go through and configure the options for that. An example would be assigning a user a PSTN calling license and then assigning them a phone number. The script has logic pre-built in that will go through and assign licenses to every user. So if you're doing 1,000 users, I will assign the licenses to 1,000 users before trying to configure the first user. The reason why I do that is so that we can go through, spend the time enabling the users, and then pause and wait for those licenses to become active before we go through and do the configuration. So if you're running the script, you will see it go through your user list, assign licenses, and then you might see it say pausing for user A or the first user in your list to have licenses assigned. It will then pause for 30 seconds and reattempt. It will continue doing this until the license is assigned, at which point it will go through and try and do all the different configurations. The thought here is that hopefully we only have to pause on those first couple of users, and by the time we go through the list, we have all of the licensings assigned because we've waited for all of them to be assigned at the same time. That is opposed to going through each user serially, in which we would have to wait that amount of time for each user. So I've tried to optimize the amount of time that it takes for the script to run. If you don't want to wait for the script to pause before going through and configuring services, you can set the pause for provisioning value to true. I'm sorry, you can set it to false. I have an error in here. By default, we will pause for provisioning. I do have an error on this slide. If you say pause for provisioning false, if we see that the license is not yet active when we try and do a configuration, we will throw an error and then we'll move on to the next user. So in that case, you might have to run the script with the same input file after amount of time to make sure configuration is done. But I do have an option here that will allow you to pause or allow you to skip the pause if you don't want to wait for those licenses to be assigned. The input file has a number of CSV options. There should be, or I intended to have a sample CSV input file in the download. I was notified just last night that the sample is not there. I will be working with my colleagues to make sure we get that download updated to make sure that the sample input file is there. But there are different values that we're looking for each user in this CSV file. User principal name will be the name of, or the user principal name, obviously, of the user that we will be looking to enable. That is very much needed in order for us to make sure that we find the appropriate user and we do the right configuration options. As I said before, we'll assign the usage location, so we'll need the usage location of the user. Could be US, could be UK. In the documentation that I have along with this, there is some information about where you can go and find the appropriate two-letter acronym for your usage location. A Boolean value, true, false, and whether or not the user should be enabled for PSTN conferencing. Again, if it's true, I will enable them. If it's false, I will not go and try and do any license assignment. The same thing is true for the next few. Enable Cloud PBX, enable PSTN calling domestic, and enable PSTN calling international. Those are always true, false. Those are the ones that I will go through and choose, should I enable those users. Some important things to remember here. You cannot have a value of true for enable PSTN calling domestic and enable PSTN calling international. The enable PSTN calling international is a license that assigns both domestic and international ability. So if both those values are true, you will get an error. So just make sure that when you do the input file, one is false and one is true. If they are both false, I won't assign any licenses. If they're both false and there is a phone number to assign, then I am assuming that this is a on-premise connectivity for PSTN, whether it's via hybrid or cloud connector edition. At which point I will go through and I will assign a phone number that can be used with the cloud PBX license, which must be true if you're using on-premise PSTN connectivity. I will assign that phone number so that they can use it in that hybrid calling scenario. If you have said enable PSTN calling domestic or enable PSTN calling international, and there's a phone number to assign, I will assign that phone number in the way that we would with our PSTN calling options. If there is no phone number to assign, and you have said that you want to enable PSTN calling domestic or international, I will look at phone number city code. This is a text code that tells me what location the user is in, and that will allow me to pick a number from the existing phone number inventory and assign to the user. If you have PSTN, if you are enabling PSTN calling, I also must have an emergency address description. This is the descriptive field that you put in when defining that emergency location. It could be anything like Redmond office. It could be, Reading office. It's whatever you've chosen to associate with that emergency location. So it's important to make sure that you look that up. One thing to note is that even though you've defined that emergency address location within online, the first time you try to assign a user a emergency address location in each geography, so it could be US or UK right now, when you do it in PowerShell, you'll be prompted with a warning that says, this is a 911 location. If you dial this number, they will be sent the address of this location. If the user's traveling, then it will be the address of where they're primarily home, not necessarily where they're homed at the time of that call. That warning will pop up, and in the middle of the script, you will have to accept that disclaimer. That disclaimer only shows up once for each geography. So the first time you run the script, you might have the emergency address disclaimer pop up for that geography, and then every time you run the script afterwards, as long as you're assigning users in that geography, it will remember that you've accepted that disclaimer and it won't prompt you again. So the first time you run the script, you might see a prompt. Don't be worried. Go ahead and accept the prompt. Sign off that you've accepted it, and then you won't see it again. If you have any questions on this, please use the Q&A. I know Thomas is diligently watching that, and he'll be able to give me any questions at the completion of our training, and I'm happy to answer them. After running the script, we will report the results of the script both to the screen and to a CSV file. What I have at the top of the slide is just a very quick example of what it might look like for two users. I ran this in a test lab. I had user one in which everything was successful, so configuration result enabled, license enablement result, they were enabled, and I assigned them a phone number. So you can see kind of what this would look like. The second user, I intentionally put in an error. I could not find the user, and so the enablement result was an error occurred, user not found, and then it gives you a little bit more information. So where I do detect errors in the scripts, I will report them at the end on screen, and then also in a CSV file. It will give you a little bit of information in terms of what error occurred. If an error occurs in licensing enablement, I will never attempt configuration. I will only attempt to configure a user if licensing enablement result was enabled. If you want to get more information into kind of why this user doesn't work or this enablement result isn't descriptive enough, I do have some troubleshooting information that will help. Upon the completion of the script, I will actually write out a verbose output.log file that can be reviewed to understand why any errors occurred. Every time you run the script, this log file will be created, so that you don't have to go through and say, oh, I had an error, let me run it again with verbose to find out what happened. And so you will be able to go through and look at that output log file. It's going to be very useful for any troubleshooting. Also, if you need to give me any feedback on the script or areas in which it isn't working, I'll need to get that verbose output, that log file from you. Now that will include a whole lot of information, including the values that were in your input file, how the user was configured before each step that I was trying to go through and enable, any information about your licensing. And so that really allows me to go through and find out, okay, here's the state in which a user was in when the error occurred. You're welcome to look through that verbose output, that log file. It lets you know exactly what the script is doing. It will also help you to troubleshoot on your own. If you are one who likes to see exactly what the script is doing at any point in real time, you can also run the script with a -verbose option. That will not only write the verbose output.log file, but it'll also write all of that verbose information of what the script is doing to the screen as the script is executing. If you are working with some sort of security team on whether or not you can run the script, you can run it with the verbose option so that you can prove to them exactly what the script is doing as it is doing it. That actually reminds me, one thing that I failed to call out earlier in the presentation is that this script is signed. There's no requirement to go through and change your execution model. This is being published by Microsoft, and so we're making sure that the script is signed by Microsoft. So if you can be sure that the script has not been changed and that it is as we have shipped it due to the signing of it. If you need any further assistance, you're trying to figure out why an error is not working, why a user isn't being enabled, why you're getting a particular error, you can email sof@microsoft.com for assistance. This will go to our larger SOF team. They'll be able to route it to me or to anyone else working with me, and then we can help to understand why you're having any issues with the script or why any users are not being enabled. It'll also help us to further iterate and improve. So what are the next steps? Go to skypeoperationsframework.com, download the material, become familiar with it, review the associated documentation that comes with the script. Everything that I talked about today is in that documentation and a bit more. Like I said, it includes the links, it includes some samples. I recommend that you review the documentation before running the script just to make sure you understand anything. If you have any feedback or any questions, please use the feedback link that we had at the beginning of this presentation. That's where we're getting feedback for all of the Skype Operations Framework material. We have people looking at that on a daily basis. If there's feedback on the script, they'll make sure that I see it, and then we can respond to you. After you've gone through, you reviewed the documentation, you're comfortable running the script, identify users and create your input files. Make sure that you know which users you want to enable for what, whether or not they need to have specific phone numbers assigned, what city codes they're going to be in. Make sure that you've met all the prerequisite requirements, you've met all the assumptions that we have phone numbers, that we've set up emergency address locations. Then test the script at a small scale. Run it on just a couple of users. Make sure that it's going to work. Make sure that you've met all the prerequisites, that the assumptions are true. And then scale up when you start enabling users. Start off, 5, 10, 50, 100 until you're comfortable with the script, its execution, whether or not making sure that it's meeting your requirements. And then you can start scaling out your enablement of users and preparing this for as you migrate sites to our Skype for Business voice connectivity options. A couple of resources for SOF. Top one is the download link. That's where you can go and get the script and any information. The feedback link that I just talked about, where you can submit any feedback on additional enhancements, any questions, what you would like to see in the next scripts please use that feedback link. It will help us prioritize. And then obviously, if you want any more training, there's the Academy link that will have the recording of this training as well as the recording of all other of our Skype Operations Framework trainings. And with that, I think I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Thomas has been watching Q&A, so he's going to give me some of the questions. If you have any questions, you haven't asked them so far, please use the link as described by Janice at the beginning. Submit any questions. I'm happy to respond to them on this. Otherwise, if you have any questions afterwards, please use the feedback link. It looks like we have, we have a couple of questions that I'm going to go through, and Thomas will continue to add these in if you have any others. First one, can the script be modified and extended to suit my organization's needs? Like I said before, the script is signed. If you were to go and modify anything within the script, the signing would not, it would not run in a secured environment because it would see that the script is modified. You could then choose to say, go ahead and run any unsigned scripts and run your modified version. However, I don't recommend that. If you need additional configuration options, one, let us know in feedback, or two, use the framework of what I have in this script in connecting to online and Skype for Business. And I would say write your own scripts afterwards to do the configurations, the options that you want. If you're not a scripting person, you're not familiar with it, give us the feedback. We'll triage it. We'll rank it, and we'll try and get it into the next iterations of the operations framework. Second one, where can I find materials on how to customize policies assigned to my users? There's definitely materials that are in the associated documentation that tell you about all the different tools that are needed. But there are also some very good blogs that are out there. I know that Thomas has written one that's out on our Nextop blog. I believe the nextop.info link still works. That talks about how to find which policies are available and how to assign those to users. So I would certainly use the internet and some of the Microsoft and MVP blogs as a way of going out and finding what options are available for policy configuration. And we have one other question. Can the script be used for on-premise systems? No. Well, I guess the answer is sort of. If your user is hosted on-prem, the answer is no. One of the assumptions in the script was that the user is hosted online. The it depends part of it comes into if you're trying to configure PSTN calling options for connectivity through via hybrid or Cloud Connector Edition. In that case, yes, run the script, use it to assign phone numbers for users, use it to assign the Cloud PBX license and phone numbers to users so that they can use the calling capabilities of our platform via the hybrid configuration. Otherwise, this script should not be used for enabling mass amounts of on-prem users. It looks like those are all the questions we have. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Janice. She's got a couple more instructions, and then if any questions come in the meantime, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, that will conclude today's presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Nick. All right, audience, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, now would be a good time to go ahead and do that. You'll want to just insert your question into the white text box, either to the right of the video pane or by scrolling down to just below. While we wait for those to come in, I'd like to bring your attention to a link on the upper right-hand side of the viewing window that says, please take a short survey. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference, and we ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference or have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And with that, I'm going to check the Q&A panel, see if we have anything that's come in. I don't see anything. Nick, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Nope. Like I said, the only other final thought I have is give us feedback. I want to improve. We want to continue iterating on these scripts. We want to increase the amount of scripts that we have for configuration. So let us know what it is that you need to have done, and we will prioritize those. And thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, audience, that is going to conclude today's web conference. We will be leaving the Q&A open for just a couple more minutes for those of you who have any lingering questions out there. Attendees may access the web conference recording via a link that will be delivered within 72 hours post-conference. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, Nick Smith, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today. You may now disconnect from the broadcast.